Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo Chapter 2 is here, so strap in and spoilers beware. Alright y'all, first things first, since we are back in spoiler and leak territory, just a reminder to take everything with a grain of salt. I'm going to do my best to fill in the blanks and find the best translations I can, but obviously nothing will be as good as when the actual chapter drops, so read it on Sunday. I'll be doing another video then, we'll probably be doing a live stream reading it together, but that being said, let's actually get into this. All right, so chapter 2 begins with an establishing shot of a building, and this building is known as the Kyoto Future Science Museum. And we've got some narration that lets us know that this is actually a flashback. We are going back to before the events with Maru at the end of the first chapter. So before Yuka and Sudugi discovered that he was an alien. And in this flashback, we see Usami, the man in the suit from chapter 1 that gave Yuka and Sudugi their orders. And with them is another man in a suit. And that other man says, is this really okay for us to be working with them? Like, isn't there worries of them giving us like alien infectious diseases or something like that? We should have the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare quarantine measures in place. There's no telling what could happen. And Usami, in response to that, he says that, when we're dealing with someone whose religion, language, history, and culture are all unknown, we really need to take it safe. But there's really nothing that our modern medicine can't deal with. So we'll just have to play it safe because the moment we do anything wrong could be a declaration of war. The two of them then continue their conversation down a hallway until they arrive in a room. And the unknown suit says, we don't even know what their genders are, so hopefully us as two men arriving to greet them doesn't stir up any tension. And Usami says, you're the one that knows what to do here, I'm gonna leave this to you. And the unknown suit says, I studied all those years to prevent these types of situations, and now we're here. We then see two aliens enter the room, one of whom appears to be Maru's twin brother. The other is a brand new character that we haven't seen before. He also has 3 eyes like this, but he really doesn't look like Maru. Like, he's fatter, he's wearing different robes, and he's got long, droopy ears. And it's that new character that says, hi, my name is Jabba Roma, the Samuria Diplomacy Specialist. And forgive me on these pronunciations, y'all. And he continues and says, and this is our dispatched agent, Cross. So Maru's brother might be named Cross, or that might be a code name, or it might be a weird translation. The new Jabba alien then says, thank you so much for the warm welcome from everyone on Earth. Then Maru's twin says, yes, we are very grateful. Then Usami says, of course, we sincerely welcome you. My name is Usami, and I've been appointed as the acting minister of foreign affairs. Then the unknown suit guy introduces himself as Mino, Usami's subordinate. Meanwhile, Usami is thinking to himself, Japanese. They're speaking perfect Japanese. Just how much have they studied? Did they anticipate this even back when they were in America? Usami then continues thinking to himself, they're probably just screwing with us on purpose. And I think he's referring to America, or at least other world powers, because he goes on to say, ever since the Kyoto Paranormal Security Treaty, Japan has been uncooperative on every issue. So we can't expect any aid from domestic society. Basically saying that, maybe nobody told them that these aliens could speak their language because they wanted Japan to be thrown off guard. Usami then finishes thinking to himself, once they overcome this language barrier completely, then the advantage in information gathering will be on their side. The fat alien, and I'm just going to use this for him, then says, I have a request. Would it be acceptable for our representative to join us as well? And Usami says, representative? And the fat alien says, please don't misunderstand, but once you see for yourselves, I believe everything will become clear. And then Maru's twin says, a trial means nothing without a proper test. And then we hear like these loud thuds as we see this dark, like silhouetted, horned figure approach. It's the same guy that was sitting in like the captain's chair from the very first page of chapter 1. We then jump forward in time to Usami and Mino sitting down in a different room after that meeting took place. And Mino is going through it. He is like, oh my God, am I dreaming? Did that just happen? Is this real? I now understand what they meant when they said this was a Sukuna level threat. And Usami says, yeah, if they were serious, they could take down our country easily. Our position is very clear now. And Mino says, so we're just going to tell them thanks for not invading us and give in to all of their demands? We can't do that. And Usami says just have their envoy hide the fact that he's an alien and have him accompany some sorcerers in the field on one of their missions. At this point, it's not that serious yet. In the middle of this, we do get a panel of Maru's twin brother, and behind him is the horned, like, demon guy, and he towers over the twin. So, like, he's got to be, like, 8 to 10 feet tall. We then cut back to the Usami conversation where he says, I'm going to actually assign this to the Akotsu siblings. And Mino says, those two are talented, but aren't they a little bit young? And Usami says, the Samoria aliens are not invaders. At this stage, they're refugees. Mino then says, yeah, at this point they are. They satisfy the definition of refugees, but it's strictly within the scope of their own self-reporting. All other details are being kept confidential. And Usami says, well, since the Kyoto Paranormal Security Treaty 68 years ago, Japan grew complacent under the security treaty and ended up riding the wave of nationalism that was accelerating in us at the time. And Mino says, well, being an island nation and having exclusionary sentiments go hand in hand after all. And Usami says, we must not repeat the same mistake. With our current formalistic diplomacy, all we do now is show that we are deterring things. And the worst case scenario would proceed slowly but surely over decades. Mino then says, but after the information on the Samaria aliens is released, a movement inciting public exclusionary sentiment could lead to armed conflict, and that would be war. And Usami says, war must not happen. We must avoid it at all costs. And there was a bit of clunkiness there, but essentially they're saying, like, our best bet, or Usami is saying, like, our best bet is to just play this by the book. You know, we're treating them as refugees. We're not going to pose any threat. And let's just play out very, very slowly. Like, it might lead to war eventually, but that would be a very slow process. Ultimately, Mino is like, yeah, but as soon as people find out about these aliens, like, that's going to lead to chaos. And Usami's like, we can't have that happen. We must avoid war. Usami then, like, locks in and gets real serious, puts his hand over his heart, and he says, what we should aim for is genuine reconciliation. We will melt the hearts of these aliens and show them it's not about adult formalities, but more about the spirit of this next generation. And Mino is kind of caught off guard by this, and he's like, oh, I'm surprised. Mino then says, so we're entrusting the fate and future of Japan, no, the entire Earth, to a young boy and girl in hopes that their hearts can connect with these aliens. And Usami says, yes, and we'll do what we need to do as adults. We then cut to Yuka and Sudugi, and we are back caught up to the present. So this is them, I guess, shortly after they found out that Maru was an alien at the end of chapter 1. And Yuka says, aliens? That's kind of extreme, isn't it? And Sudugi says, that's what the guy said, referring to the kidnapper. He said, aliens are coming. Sudugi then says, under the security treaty, diplomacy with the aliens has been completely thrown over to Japan. Apparently, the Jujutsu Inspector General treated these aliens as an urgent case on the level of Sukuna. And Yuka thinks to herself, Sukuna, the one who gave Grandpa that scar on his forehead? And out loud she says, you really believe all of this? And Sudugi says, he's scum, but his judgment can be trusted. Japanese human trafficking is a huge business involving sums in the hundreds of millions. Yet, he decided to stop all of that because of the aliens. And Yuka says, yeah, I guess even a villain has some credibility when he stops doing evil, huh? And Sudugi says, plus, you saw it too, didn't you? Referring to Maru's third eye, and we get a new panel of Maru and his third eye. Yuka then says, well, there are some sorcerers with weird appearances. And Sudugi says, yeah, but there aren't many with that many eyes. And Yuka said, well, should we just ask? And Sudugi says, no, that's useless. Usami-san introduced Maru as an inspector from a security treaty member country, which must mean that even if he is an alien, we're not at the stage yet where that information can be shared with people like us at the lower level. And Yuka says, who said I said we should ask Usami? And Sudugi says, you want to ask Maru directly? Like, are you a creature from space? That's going to be a waste of time for the same reason as Usami-san. He's not going to tell us. Besides, we can't trust him no matter what he says. And Yuka says, I didn't say ask Maru either. How about the guy who said you can trust his judgment? We then cut to like a security feed of the two of them interrogating the kidnapper from chapter 1. And the rest of this page is kind of confusing in the way that it's being roughly translated right now, but essentially it's like a quick flashback to a few minutes earlier. And they basically lie to the police so that they can get access to this guy in order to ask him more questions. We then cut back to their interrogation of this guy, and Yuka says, just as I expected. And Sudugi says, what? And she says, I hate this guy. He's one of those dudes who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. And the kidnapper says, I'd say I'm for sure smarter than you. You're probably the type that doesn't do well except when you have to memorize things. And she says, no, that'd be my brother. Sudugi says, shut up, don't bring me into this. And the kidnapper says, you want to ask me about that alien guy, huh? And Sudugi says, well, before that, where did you even get the information on the aliens in the first place? Let's start there. And the kidnapper says, you should assume that any information managed digitally will almost certainly leak, especially government offices that offer AI regulations and are just barely keeping things running without reorganizing properly. Maybe they should go back to managing things on paper. And he goes, the aliens, though, they call themselves the Samrians. But Yuka says, wait, hold up. We're just going to grant that aliens actually exist? And the kidnapper is like, for real? You're going to make me go back there? You really are dumb, huh? And Yuka says, can I punch him already? And the kidnapper says, you're a sorcerer, aren't you? Why would you assume that the supernatural can't exist when your livelihood depends on the supernatural? Sudugi pauses for a moment, and then he's like, well, even still, we want certainty. Are aliens really coming to Earth? And the kidnapper says, a spaceship carrying 50,000 of these things is currently hovering above this country. And Yuka says, 50,000? And Sudugi says, that's a number that would fill an entire baseball stadium. Sudugi thinks to himself, is it even possible for a ship that big to be undetected? And they think, well, if all 50,000 of them aboard are sorcerers, perhaps they have some sort of barrier technique or technological device unknown to us. After all, they are capable of interstellar travel, so they might be self-sufficient inside the spaceship, but eventually they would hit their limit and a resupply would be necessary. The kidnapper then continues and says, tomorrow at 8 p.m., Karamayama Plateau. If the barrier technique is making the spaceship invisible, it might loosen enough during a resupply for a sorcerer to see it. So go see it with your own eyes. We then cut to after the interrogation where Mino asks about the lie they told in order to interrogate him. They're like, did you find the explosive he had? And they're like, oh yeah, it was nothing. Don't worry about it. Then the translation has been really rough here, but essentially the two of them are walking off kind of talking about what they just heard and being like, should we go and try to investigate this? And there's some talk about like how if they go rogue like that, it's a treason. Like if sorcerers kind of do their own thing, it can be treasonous, but like there's still some confusion here and we need to find out more. Then cut to the Kuriyama Plateau at night where we see Sudugi and Yuka hiking up a mountain with flashlights. And Sudugi says, gosh damn, it's so hot even at night. And he starts to take off his jacket. And Yuka says, weren't we going to the top of the mountain kind of just on a hunch? Like, couldn't it be somewhere else? And Sudugi is like, well, yeah, I mean, if there's a spaceship and a mountain, you'd go to the top, right? But Yuka just kind of stares at him and she's speechless. And he's like, what's wrong? And she says, the ring, because he took off his jacket. She can now see it. And he says, I'm not giving it back. Grandma was treated like a loser by the three big clans, but she didn't give up and she silenced everyone with her skill. Yuka says, wait, didn't she kind of like destroy the whole family more so than silence them? And Sudugi says, yeah, and that's exactly how I want to be. And Yuka thinks to herself, I think we're each chasing our own truth here. I've always wanted him to give me the ring back, but I think he's always wanted to return the ring too. We're both becoming stronger for that same reason. This gorgeous double spread of the two of them kind of reaching the top of this mountain and seeing this gigantic structure in the sky, this spaceship. It looks like this huge like plank kind of like descending down toward the earth. Sudugi then says, so the aliens really did come. And Yuka says, so this is the threat on the level of Ryomen Sukuna. And Sudugi says, yeah, that's Sukuna that was taken down by Grandma and Grandpa. I don't know why these aliens came to Earth, but whatever happens, we sorcerers have to deal with it. And Yuka says, that's what we signed up for after all. Then internally, Sudugi thinks to himself, Grandma and Grandpa aren't here anymore. And Yuka thinks to herself, We can't stay like this any longer. I need to become like Yuta Okotsu. And Sudugi thinks to himself, I need to become like Maki Zinen. We then transition to a scene with Maru and his twin brother Cross. And Maru says, Cross, it's been a while. And Cross says, Maru, you will continue to act alongside the Jujutsu sorcerers of Earth. And Maru says, that's fine, but is it necessary? And Cross says, what? And Maru says, I thought we already understood. The Earthlings are like us. There are both good and bad people. And Cross says, right, but if we don't share a judgment of good and wrong, it's meaningless. And Maru says, oh, we can do it. And Cross says, you're not the one to decide that. Right now, our opinions are divided. Conflict or coexist. And Maru says, conflict cannot be an option. Cross says, well, if you think that, then continue spending more time with the sorcerers of Earth and keep gathering information. That's your job as a warrior right now. And Maru says, well, aren't you going back to the ship? And Cross says, I have my own work to do. And Maru says, Cross, if you're not going back to the ship, why don't we have breakfast together tomorrow morning? I've learned a lot, and the food in this country is delicious. And Cross just says, I'm busy. We then cut back to Sudugi and Yuka, who are now no longer on the mountain, but are seemingly walking back into some sort of building, one where they have to like scan an ID pass in order to get in. And Sudugi goes, oh, and Yuka goes, what are you doing? And Sudugi goes, I forgot that I didn't come with my Jujutsu pass. I need to redo the link. So Yuka, you go on ahead a bit. We then cut to Sudugi outside, who is now like on this roof area. And he goes, oh, Maru, what are you doing? Because he thinks he sees Maru on the roof, but actually it's his twin brother Cross. And Sudugi says, you know, if you're up here, people are going to think you're going to jump. The police are going to be called. It's also trespassing. Do you guys have that on your planet? And Cross just says, shut up. Don't talk to me. And then he like disappears off this roof. I don't know if the implication is that he jumped or he like vanished in some sort of other way, but he's gone. And Sudugi is just sitting there being like, what the hell is up with that guy? And that's where chapter 2 ends. And y'all, I apologize for how rough the translations were in spots there. I was really doing my best to try and fill in the blanks where it didn't really make sense. I was cross-referencing several translations and even trying to translate some of it myself. But that being said, please, please, please just read the official on Sunday. Like I mentioned earlier, I'll be making a new video on it then. We'll probably do a live stream on it then. Just please consume this in the way it was meant to be consumed. But I wanted to try to give the best possible picture I could of this because I know it's going to be all out there starting now. But thank you for bearing with me through this far. Anyways, with all that being said, a quick recap as I understood it this chapter is we find out the aliens showed up. Usami is in charge of kind of doing the diplomacy here, and the aliens basically let it known that they got Big Boss with the horns standing on deck, and it's kind of that presence that makes them realize, oh yeah, this is a Sukuna level threat. So I don't know if that guy is meant to be like Sukuna level or just that they have people like that, potentially 50,000 people like that, means they mean business. And obviously the aliens know a lot more than they're letting on, considering they basically already speak fluent Japanese. It's determined that given like the political climate right now, really their best bet is to defer to them and try to be as peaceful as possible, give in to their demands, considering they're just claiming to be refugees right now. And Usami is like, we got to give this to the next generation, basically banking on the Okotsu grandkids to kind of connect with this alien and make it seem like actual peace can be had here. And we know that Maru is for that, but his brother, or at least some of the other aliens, aren't. And then as far as what was going on with the kidnapper, that basically just served as a way for them to find out enough to go discover the spaceship, which they do, and now they're obviously piecing together that they're the ones that have to deal with this, and they really want to be just like their grandparents, with her becoming like Yuta and him becoming like Maki, which was so cool. And that's essentially the chapter, with finally his chance meeting with Cross there at the end. Anyways, y'all, that's gonna do it for this one. Your boy is exhausted. I'm gonna go crash, but please let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. Better yet, come join the Discord, talk with us there. And as always, thank you for watching.